Well, thanks for joining this special time as we explore one of the important resources in the Anabaptism at 500 resource suite. My name is Mitch Stutzman. I serve as Director of Development and Partner Engagement at Minnow Media, and really grateful for those that are joining this call who have been an important part of making projects like Drawing Near and the rest of the Anabaptism at 500 resource suite a reality. Joined here with other colleagues from Minnow Media that will introduce themselves along the way, and also contributors to the resource Drawing Near. But first and foremost, I want everyone to hear our sincere thanks for helping make this work possible. And I hope that we all can appreciate the dive into this beautiful and meaningful resource. And for more context around Drawing Near, this devotional book, where it came from, how it fits in the overall vision of Anabaptism at 500, I'd like John Roth, project director, to give us a few more words around that. John?
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen here. And I think that should do it. Are you able to see that that header slide? When we first envisioned the Anabaptist Community Bible, it became clear to me early on that we also needed to do art. Art needed to be part of that project. I think all of us are aware that in the history of the Christian church, actually from the very beginning, the visual image has been important. And so we know that the early church depicted its crucial symbols, its key symbols with mosaics. The medieval church decorated its windows with colorful descriptions of biblical stories. There's the common saying that the stained glass windows were the poor person's Bible, that you would read the windows for people who were not literate. And in the Reformation, at the time when the Bible was becoming accessible to the common person in the vernacular, there was an ongoing recognition that embedded in the text of the Bible, there should also be visual images for either for illiterate people or recognizing that our minds are engaged the biblical content in a different way through the medium of art. And so here we have, for example, a depiction of Luther and his entire theology. If we had time, we could untangle all that's going on in this image. We
John,
know in
can
the
you
end.
try sharing your screen again? We're unable to see the image that you're referencing.
Oh, okay. Can you see it now?
We see your title slide now. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mitch. Yes, when we first conceived the project of the Anabaptist Community Bible, it became clear to us right from the beginning that we wanted to include artwork. We know that art was an important element in the history of the early church. We have these mosaics from the second, third, fourth century in which Christians are giving visual expression to the symbols of their faith. Most people are aware that in medieval cathedrals, the stained glass windows served also as a way of giving illiterate people access to biblical stories so that one could almost read the Bible through the visual image of stained glass windows. And at the time of the Reformation, as the Bible was becoming more accessible in the vernacular, early Reformation leaders like Martin Luther and Ulrich Zwingli were also keenly aware of the power of the visual image and took pains to develop patrons with artists who would provide a visual angle on Reformation theology. So here in this image, you could decode Luther's entire theology. If we had time, we could um, work through that image. The Anabaptists, of course, also recognize the power of visual images, so that the 1685 edition of the Martyr's Mirror includes 103 etchings by the well-known Dutch Mennonite artist Jan Lauken. And often it's the image that sticks with us as much as the story, or the story is carried by the visual image. When we were looking at the Anabaptist Community Bible, I was thinking at the time of some dramatic art done by the Catholic artist Fritz Eichenberg for the Catholic Worker. I had seen these images at some point, and when I looked at those, I thought there's something about those that we would love to include in the Anabaptist Community Bible. And so we invited 5 artists with Anabaptist backgrounds to participate in a project in which we imagined 40 pieces of art, original artwork that would be created for the Anabaptist Community Bible. Some of the topics we chose, Molly and I identified, but other topics we allowed the artist to choose. And out of that came these images. I'll just show you a very few, which give you a sense of the range, all in the linocut, woodcut style genre, but with very distinctive artistic visions. So this is the healing of this on the Sabbath in Luke. Here is the Emmaus Road, breaking bread together. Here is Lydia's conversion, Ruth and Naomi. We were so taken by the artwork that we commissioned for the Anabaptist Community Bible that it seemed a shame if that was the only venue in which that art would be seen. And so Molly and Amy and I conceived of a devotional project that would feature the art, but would bring the art into conversation with another form of creative expression, that is poetry. Uh, a good portion of the Bible, the Psalms, for example, are poetry. Poetry is also a way in which we express our deepest feelings, our emotions. And so out of that vision, the idea emerged that we would invite 40 Anabaptist poets to respond to one of the images. We didn't give them a choice. We said, if you're part of this project, we'll send you the image, and we invite you to write a poem. I learned a new word in this process. It's called ekphrasis poetry, where you look at an image and then you write a poem based on that image. And we then paired the image. We had the scripture passage, we paired it with the image, we invited a poet to write a poem, and then we had a few reflection questions. And out of that emerged this, I think, remarkable devotional called Drawing Near. We are really pleased, we're privileged to have 2 contributors to that project joining us on this webinar. The first is Carmen Horst, who is a pastor at the Walnut Hills Mennonite Church in Goshen, Indiana, currently on sabbatical. But in her free time, Carmen is a poet. And she will say a few words about her process in this Drawing Near project. And then we'll turn to an artist. Dona Park is a Korean Canadian, maybe American too, artist currently living in Abbotsford, who has a remarkable facility in communicating complex ideas in very vivid and moving images. And Dona, Carmen, we're really pleased that you're part of this conversation. Let's turn to Carmen first and hear something of your creative process. And you'll have to unmute yourself. There you
Yes,
go.
thank you, John. Well, first, I printed out and taped a copy of Dona's piece on the wall across from my desk so that I was often gazing at it, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, just seeing it a lot, noticing its physical presence, what emotions I perceived, what words and thoughts and questions emerged. And the first bit of writing I did was about the moon. It seemed to me that the artist is opening a gap in the grasses, um, to let us in on a secret, something not everyone can see. There are layers to reality. Molly, would you share the, actually, I guess I asked you to share the poem, not the image, so people can't see the, there we go. Thank you. So early versions of the poem started with the moon, and then it dropped out altogether. And toward the end of the process, the moon came back as the shofar, the ceremonial ram's horn, and the Hebrew festival of the new moon. There's a little poet joke in the second stanza. There's a very famous poem by Wordsworth that includes a line about birth, that goes, trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. So if you read the poem, you'll find a reference to that in the second stanza. Early on, I was also drawn to the two faces. One seems older, one younger, and that eyebrow that raised, maybe it's just the shape of her face, but if it's a raised eyebrow, it seems to know and appraise from an inward place of calm and freedom. And I was actually a doula for a while, accompanying women in childbirth. And so I remembered my own work during that time. The care it took to be ready to go at a moment's notice, have my bag packed, attentive to getting enough sleep and eating regularly, and those moments of being on my way to whatever awaited me. I often sang the Taizé song as I drove, "Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life." So I imagined what it was like to be going, for these midwives to be going to a birth and to be walking on the way to Pharaoh, how that felt, what they saw, what they said to each other, maybe considering what they would say to Pharaoh. Childbirth was such a dangerous passage at that time, with or without a midwife. And these women worked on that threshold between life and death, heaven and earth, and that gave them power that they chose to use in a significant way. Eventually, I knew that I wanted the rhythm of their walking in the poem. And I looked and looked at the flowers. I thought irises or narcissus, maybe. And I knew irises had some ancient uses in childbirth. There's even an iris called the African iris that would have grown along the Nile. And I decided I wanted the flowers in the poem and needed to know for sure. So I contacted Dona, and she wrote back to say, yes, they are irises, and that she had been reading about how symbolic they were for faith. And the virtues named in the poem, valor, wisdom, faith, are all associated with the iris. I read about Shifra and Pua in biblical commentaries. I wrote to Paul Keim, who's a professor of Hebrew, to ask about the meanings of their names. And he wrote back that Shifra could be derived from a root meaning beautiful, but that there are several roots using the same three base letters, which have quite different meanings, including one related to the shofar. And Pua is even more obscure in its origins. For a while, there were lines in the poem about the meanings of their names, but those didn't make it into the final version. It seemed more important that we learn their names, that they be remembered and celebrated. And I imagined that everyone knew the midwives' names at the time in the community. Rabbinic tradition also includes the possibility that they were actually Egyptian women. As the text is currently vocalized in the Hebrew Bible, it clearly says Hebrew midwives, but the same underlying letters could be vocalized as midwives of the Hebrew women, suggesting that they might have been Egyptian midwives who served the Hebrew women. And I found it very intriguing to consider that they might have been Egyptian women whose commitment to life was stronger than their national or political identities. This assignment also came right around the time of the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of this most intense devastation in Gaza, and I felt the climbing death count in my gut as I looked also at the image, and the possibility of violence at any moment, the sense of being part of a trapped and targeted people, an expendable people. And I imagined the midwives walking toward the court with that sense of danger and violence. And I am so grateful that this story is in our holy book, this story of wise and strong women resisting genocide. And I was drawn to the babies, hidden by the cloaks, but we are allowed to see them. Again, we are let in on the secret of their survival. Very newborn babies are wide awake when they are healthy, looking around with wide alertness. After feeding, they sleep and sleep and sleep, but at first they are wide awake and taking everyone in. And I thought Dona did a lovely job of portraying that. So there were many versions. My poetry tends to be more lyrical than narrative, and it often feels like what I imagine sculpture to be like, shaping a thing rather than telling a story or clarifying ideas, taking a little off here, turning it, stepping back to look at the whole, moving in again to shift, to shape. More an intuitive connection to shape and the physical elements of sound and rhythm than ideas. Of course, ideas are there and very much a part of what takes shape. But the revision process, at least for sure, feels more like making an object than, say, writing an essay or a sermon. I will say also that Li Yang Li, who's a contemporary American poet that I admire, tells a story about walking into a cathedral and seeing a little boy lying on the floor looking up, and hears him saying to his mother, "I'm falling upwards." And Lee says, "I had been walking around in vertical space all day long, but I didn't realize it until I walked into the cathedral." And he says that similarly, in a poem, the words create an architecture that makes one more aware of the silence within and around the poem. And I love that. That's something of what I would like people to experience when they read one of my poems, that they might hear the silence more deeply and connect to depths of wonder and curiosity. Ancient rabbis called the words, the strokes of ink on the page, the black fire, and the space between and around the words, the white fire, suggesting that the silence was at least as important as the words.
Could you read the poem for us?
Yes, I would love to. Shifra and Pua, Selah. You drew me from the womb, kept me safe at my mother's breast. Psalm 22:9. Sudden summons are nothing new. All their hours appraised are poised between heaven and earth, like an eyebrow raised. Moon, the shofar, moans, travails, trailing clouds of iris, blood, death's devouring, rivers flood. Passing through fields of swords upraised, they gather valor, wisdom, faith, like scepters. They tell their truth, they disobey. New moon, rejoice, no mourning today. Learn them, Shifra, Pua, praise. Let them again be household names. Egyptian midwives in Midrash reading, save the fathers, deliver a nation. Bouquet of babies, bright-eyed, breathing.
Thank you, Carmen. I hope there'll be time at the end of this hour to come back and ask further questions about both Dona and to both Dona and Carmen. But I appreciate that those reflections on what all lies behind that poem. Let's turn our attention now to Dona Park, who is the artist that created this image of Shiphrah and Puah. Dona?
Thank you, John, and thank you, Carmen, for I feel like you wrote my drawing in words. Like it's yeah, to understand the research that you did to create your poem. It's like I'm so moved. I don't think I have words to explain my process. You took them out of my mouth. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, let me collect myself and explain about what inspires me when I create my artwork. And I'll actually share my screen to show a bit of my work as well. I think everyone can see this. So something I want to talk about is the language of patterns, and this is a common theme that kind of inevitably came out as I created my work from the past 4 years. And I saw this theme also through the Anabaptist Community Bible and also for drawing near as well. So this is the language of patterns is something I talked about at the Ohio Arts Weekend this past February as well. And when we think of patterns, we think of repeated decorative design, and that's the technical definition. But if it's metaphorically applied, it's also routine, discipline, tradition along the theme of repetition. In Buddhist practice, the tradition of bowing 108 times is often referred to as 108 prostrations, where practitioners they perform like a full body bow of 108 times to symbolize reverence and humility and respect, often towards the Buddha, typically done in front of a Buddha statue. And I've seen peace activists use this form as an act of protest when I was learning about protests against the construction of military bases in Jeju Island in South Korea. And like so, in a metaphorical sense, I didn't really see this as a decorative method to create patterns, but as a symbol that wields power, resistance, activism, peaceful resistance. So this piece that I created, this was 2 years ago. It's the most beautiful flower in the world, and it's the Rose of Sharon, in South Korea, which is our national flower. And I saw this poster in Korea, and it said the most beautiful flower in the world. And someone who struggles in between countries, between nationalities and cultural tensions, I saw this as like an affirmation to my own identity that yes, I am a beautiful flower, and what act and what symbol do I carry if I repeat, how do you say, I repeat this idea of beauty a million times? Like, does it affirm my beauty even more? Or, yeah, so it was just a way to process how I saw myself. And in between, there's symbols of death. There's Chinese characters that represent my family name. But yeah, so again, like patterns are a consistent theme in what I do. And again, this is an oil painting that I did in my residency last year. And another way to affirm my identity as a Korean Canadian. I had never painted a portrait of myself in a realistic way or in oil painting. So again, like repeating myself, repeating images of myself, or as a way to reclaim my identity. And likewise, I also completed this piece just this year, but I started this in my international residency in France, where I felt culturally isolated and felt a bit paralyzed in creating, especially after a period of mental and physical burnout. So I resorted to creating what I know. And inspired by the patterns I saw in Korean palaces, I painted one design over and over and over again. It helped me warm up, loosen my muscles, and later feel more comfortable in what I was doing. And later, I also reflected on why I chose to create this type of work. And like so, I think my pieces in the drawing near also contains patterns of lotuses, flowers, and so forth. And it's something that I take great joy and comfort in creating. And as I create patterns, what I noticed was that power comes from collective action or collectivity. So the repetition of patterns or decorative motifs or the symbols I put in my artwork, it's not so much a decoration, but there's ways that there are ways in way how I reclaim my identity and how I see myself or how I seek power in spaces where I don't belong. And this is one activity that I did at the Ohio Arts Weekend, where we emphasized on the importance of pattern and collectivity. And on the left, yeah, those are examples of actual lino cuts that I did with the woman in this group. But also, yeah, it was fascinating to see, like, after I completed the illustrations for the ACB, there's this like smooth transition of actually working with lino cuts, especially since most of my artworks were done digitally, but I wanted to maintain that theme in like tactile ways as well. And yes, yeah, even in this painting or in this illustration for the Garden of Eden, there's a repetition of nature, leaves, or in this one that represents Isaiah 48, there's a repetition of lotuses and the waves, and all to say that these the act of repetition has become a form of meditation for me in representing beyond something decorative. And I think, yeah, as for my faith in art, one of my commissioned illustrations that continues to inspire me when finding purpose in more religion-based artwork is an illustration that I did with MCUSA's Defund the Police and Abolition curriculum as pictured here. And one of the prompts that I received in visualizing something for the church or for the Anabaptist community was to visualize an ideal world where we felt safe, without surveillance, but of safety and happiness. And like so, I wanted to create pieces for the Drawing Near and the Anabaptist Community Bible where I could visualize an ideal church that sits in peace with the environment and our interactions within it. And I didn't, we as artists, I think everyone saw their illustrations when the Bible was published. And it was such a lovely surprise, but it also showed it like I didn't expect my art to be so feminine and so focused on female figures. But I realized that's my way of saying I want to carve spaces for people like me, whether it's more Asian inspired or whether it wants more representation of female figures. That's the community and that's the artwork I was creating. And so when I'm flipping through the Bible and I see my pieces, I'm like, oh, I hope whoever is whoever looks like me, who has similar backgrounds like me, can also identify themselves in this very like Mennonite space. So yes, that's that's all I have to say.
Dona, thank you. Thank you very much for offering that larger context for the vision that emerged then finally in the art that you did for the Anabaptist Community Bible. I think you did 10 different pieces, is that right?
Yep.
And I think if you go through the Bible, you will recognize Dona's work, and yet each piece is its own thing. And I think that's a part of its beauty. I have spent many, many hours looking at these images, working with the poems as editor of Drawing Near. I should mention, along with my colleague Eileen Kinch, who is poetry editor of Anabaptist World and was a crucial part of this. But I've lived with these images and poems for a long time, and now hearing Carmen and Dona talk, I come to realize how much more there is to still see. And I think that's part of the beauty of both poetry and art, that no matter how often you look at it and you think you've grasped it, on another day, there may be something that you hadn't seen before. We're going to shift now to let's see if I can make my slideshow work. Are you seeing that now? The drawing near. Here is an image of the book itself, Drawing Near: A Devotional Journey with Art, Poetry, and Reflection. The book is already out. It is available through Menno Media. I think it will make a lovely devotional, but a great gift if you're trying to think of something distinctive, unique to share with somebody else. And the book can be, it can be read at your leisure. It can be part of a spiritual discipline of devotions. But I also want to suggest one particular way in which this book might be used that is sometimes called Visio Divina. I think many of us are familiar with Lectio Divina, an approach to reading scripture in which we're invited to slow down, to read the passage, take some deep breaths, to reflect on it, to ask what word or what image is coming to mind, to read it again, and to allow yourself time and space to absorb the text. There is also a parallel spiritual discipline, sometimes called Visio Divina, that invites us to step out of a world that is so filled with glimpses and glances, and a kind of, we become receptors of images that are thrown in our path, and to breathe deeply as we gaze at an image. I think it's the Gospel of Luke that has frequent references to look, stop, see, gaze, behold. And Visio Divina is one way of doing that. And I would like to suggest that this book, Drawing Near, might be a useful vehicle for the spiritual discipline of gazing. The process goes something like this. You begin by reading the passage, familiarizing yourself with the biblical story, with the context, and then turn your attention to the image. And it's up to each individual how long you would want to do this. If we were actually going to do this discipline together, I would suggest at least 3 or 4 minutes. 5 would probably be better. Even though it may feel like a long time, I am certain that you will see things in minute 4 that you didn't see in minute 2. But you spend time gazing at the image, look at it as a whole, focus on particular details, ask yourself, where is your eye drawn? And then read the poem. Read it out loud, read it slowly, maybe pause and read it again, and return to the image, and then spend more time in the spiritual discipline of gazing, asking yourself, what emotions do you feel as you're looking at the image? What ideas, what thoughts prompted perhaps by the poem, make your mind move in a different direction, or invite your mind to move in a different direction. And then return to the 4 reflection questions that accompany each of the scripture passages, image, and poem in drawing near, and use those as an opportunity to allow your mind to wander and to engage in some sort of creative response. And for different people, that will look differently. Some people will enjoy journaling. Some people might sketch, doodle, draw, create a word cloud, whatever form of creativity you are inspired by. And that whole process, well, could take as long as you choose to allow it to take. So if we were doing this, again, we don't have time to actually do it. We would read in this case, I've selected the passage in which Pilate is given an opportunity to pardon Jesus. And the crowd, of course, demands that he be crucified, and Pilate, exasperated, washes his hands, saying he's innocent of this man's blood. Here we have an image by Matthew Regier, an artist from Kansas, of Pilate washing his hands. This may violate the spirit of Visio Divina, but I'd love to hear, if it will take maybe 2 minutes, I'd love to hear, what do you see in this image? What are things that come to your mind when you look at this? Where is your eye drawn? You may have to unmute yourself.
For me, I'm really drawn to his eyes because there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was drawn to the hands, specifically the blood or water dripping from his hands.
Is justice blind, or are those the hollow eyes of a hollow person? Anyone else before we move on? And then comes the poem, in this case by the poet Keith Ratzlaff. Molly, would you read the poem?
Sure, I can do that. Then Pilate. In her dream, my wife saw it all. Barabbas, Jesus sweating, blood and light, the cross. How much of the cross is the road to the cross? He's innocent, she said. I've suffered, you can't imagine, all day. Don't touch him. So I didn't. Or I did. I was innocent, I told them. No. How much of justice is looking the other way? How much of innocence is the way the wind blows? When I washed my hands, they were too big for the water.
Thank you. Then it might be helpful to go back to the image, to look at it again, to ask, what do you see this time that is new or confirmed? And then we could close by pondering these reflection questions, although it should be emphasized that they're not obligatory. It's not a quiz. It's not something that any reader should feel compelled to respond to. But some readers will, I think, find it useful to have these prompts. With whom do you identify most in the passage? Was Pilate following the counsel of his wife, or did she intend for Pilate to intervene on behalf of Jesus? Reflect on a time when you have tried to wash your hands of moral responsibility. So that's the one potential way of bringing the gifts of this book into either your private devotional life, or I could imagine something like this working in a small group setting. I have done it in various contexts, including a Sunday morning worship service, which was, I'm sure for some people, a bit of a stretch, but others expressed enthusiastic appreciation at the end. And I hope that however you approach this book, Drawing Near, that you will find a path to a deeper engagement with the world and a richer, maybe surprising experience of the Spirit of God moving in your mind and in your heart. And this is a prayer that we have suggested back when we invited groups to participate in the Anabaptist Community Bible in the form of a Bible study commentary. We suggested that they begin and end their sessions with this prayer from Ulrich Zwingli, a person who had a deeply conflicted relationship with the Anabaptists, both a mentor, but also in the end, an antagonist to the Anabaptists. But this prayer I've found to be a beautiful prayer. And you might close with that. I'll stop sharing. We have about 10 minutes left. I know that Mitch has a few concluding words that he'd like to share, but I wonder if before we get to that, if anyone here on the conversation would like to engage with Carmen or Dona about their reflections on the poetry and art that went into their contributions.
I'll jump in and say we've had some folks submit questions through the chat feature that I can present specifically to Dona and Carmen. Some things have been used along the way, but I wonder specifically as one of the poets and one of the artists, what do you hope happens as people encounter this book? It's a big question.
Maybe I can answer first. I think when John explained the history of art in the church and how it, like, if you enter a cathedral, they still have patrons of the art as the church and the artists creating like the Sistine Chapel and whatnot. Um, I it's interesting because in that way, like, art is so accepted in this religious circle. However, I always see artists as iconoclasts and challengers, and kind of they're very countercultural. And sometimes I think in church spaces, it's really hard for creative people to exist and to find space, safety or acceptance. So I hope that with drawing near, in combination of art and poetry, that people who are reading it don't withdraw themselves from the world of creativity, but instead see this as opportunity to see these forms of art as a way to interpret the Bible and to see it as a way to seek humanity through the arts instead of seeing it as a way, instead of being deterred by it.
I think we would like the Bible to be a rule book, like the rule book for the homeowners association. And it's just not. It's mostly stories. And stories are about relationships and imagination, and they work on the heart at the level of the slow transformation of the heart and our worldview. And I hope that happens also with visual art, and I hope that is what happens for people with this book.
Other questions or curiosities from those here on the call?
I really appreciate the book a lot, and it's been helpful to hear both Carmen and Dona. I just find that the art and the poetry very fascinating. I have to look at the picture and read the poem, and then look at the picture again, and pick up different things each time. My one question is not for either of you, but I don't, there's an image that Randy Horst uses on all of his sketches, and I don't know what that circle image means. Dona, I saw it on your image that you did for MCUSA, Defund the Police. It looks to me like there's that same round image in the building, the window. Is that a Greek image? I don't know what that image is. Do you know which I'm talking about? There. What does that circle symbolize in the top left corner?
For my illustration, I think it's actually just a decorative flower versus I think Randy's has some
Okay.
symbolic meaning that I don't know.
John might be able to speak more specifically about that, but if you look very closely, there are letters in each of the segments of that circle that depict the divine name, or Yahweh, the
Okay.
letters of, and so my understanding is Randy included that in all of his artwork across, because he had art spread out through the biblical narrative, but added this touchstone of the divine name as a constant presence throughout
Okay.
each of his depictions. Maybe John, if there's further expansion on that.
Yes, we had an interesting conversation with Randy about that. We haven't asked the artist to sign their artwork. I mean, it is always attributed to the artist, but the signature isn't part of the artwork. And we wondered if that use of that image on all of the art pieces was a kind of signature. But in the end, Randy made a compelling case. It is a circle and a cross, which have deep Christian connotations, and is it the tetragrammaton? The four letters for Yahweh, the name that cannot be spoken, is it YHWH, I think, and it is also a compass. I think all of those ideas were embedded in that kind of signature mark that appears in all of Randy's art pieces.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or curiosities from those here?
I just have a question. I'm just curious in terms of like the length of time, like Carmen, you had talked about writing a poem and then going back and then even also for Dona, like how long does the whole process takes from like beginning to end?
Do you want to explain, Carmen, or?
Well, uh, I think certainly if it's an assignment, I take the time I have. And a poem does, sometimes feels done, but usually it's more like it's time to send it in. And uh, yeah, more often it's just time for it to be finished, or I have the sense that messing with it anymore will ruin it, and it's done. When I have something I'm satisfied with, I send it to my readers, my spouse, and a couple of college friends who write, and then I mess with it some more. But yeah, this assignment came in October, I believe, and I wasn't late, but I did take the time that I was given.
For me, I think it's hard to quantify the time because when I receive the prompt, it's really easy for me to just visualize it instead of break it down into parts. So it's in my head and then I just kind of vomit it out and then have people revise and edit or have feedback. And then depending on that feedback, I'll work on it. But usually if I receive a prompt, it's already in my head. Yeah, which maybe reduces time more because I know what I'm getting into.
We did have a process in which the artist sent sketches or early designs and gave us and our design team, Menno Media is blessed with some really gifted designers, a chance to just offer initial uh, reactions. And I found that process to be, was not as complicated as I thought it might be. It was really enjoyable working with the artists. And I think Eileen Kinch, the poetry editor, might have had a similar, it depended on the poem, but some kind of engagement with the poets. But I would say the editorial process for this was truly enjoyable.
I will add that I certainly hope that it inspires people to create art and poetry. One of the things I'm so grateful to my parents for is that they modeled and taught us that to be human is to create things, is to make things, and not just the professionals get to create. My dad always had a painting or a sketch he was working on, and my mom made music and made us make music, and just part of being human is making art, and I have come to appreciate that so much.
That's a good word, Carmen. Yeah. I really want to extend thanks specifically to Dona and to Carmen this evening for sharing more of your process and insights into this profound experience that now you have released for the world to encounter. That's no small thing. One of the really special things that I have encountered through my work at Menomedia, specifically with the Anabaptism at 500 project, has been how community has built stuff together. Like Carmen, you talk about being human is being able to create. And what has been really profound is when you pick up the Anabaptist Community Bible and you look at the pages and pages of contributors to that resource, and then you pick up Drawing Near and you look at the pages and pages of contributors that made this really special thing. It is beautiful what can be accomplished together in this way, and this is one such resource that is a really great example of the possibility that's there. And so not only have we these groups of artists and poets giving their skills, and then we have folks at Menomedia that are putting their technical expertise to work to package this in a way that's accessible and readable. All of this is done in community, and our community of donors is another really important part of that. That none of this is possible without the dollars that are so generously given to our organization. And for those on this call and watching this recording, I hope you hear our heartfelt thanks for helping make creations like this a possibility for our church. It's a great gift to our church and to the world to be able to encounter scripture and art in meaningful ways. And the team of technical experts and our resource that we have in artists and poets to help make all of that possible. It can't be done without any one of those pieces. And so, Carmen, Dona, thank you so much for your contributions and sharing a glimpse into that. To the Menomedia staff, I extend my thanks there. To the donors on this call, heartfelt thanks for helping make all of that possible. John?
Well, and I would just add to that, if I'm not mistaken, Versa Press donated the cost of producing this lovely hardbound gold stamp foil cover ribbon, this book, so that what you see as the final product also was part of a larger community gift from Versa Press. So I want to give a shout out to them as well.
Yes, thank you, John, for lifting that up. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your evening, for continuing to engage with Menomedia and the resources that are coming out of there and being a part of this broader family. So we will adjourn our time. We can stick around for as long as people want to, but at this point, our scheduled programming is complete.